Hi, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's, and I would like to welcome you to a very special interview I'm really excited about with Mr. Gerry Kelly. Gerry, thank you so much for taking time to meet with us and sit down.
Well, thanks for the invitation, and it's my privilege to speak to you and to speak to these people.
Oh man, I can't tell you how excited I am. I really have been looking forward to this for as long as I can stand it. So let's just jump right in because I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. Let's talk about you and kind of where you're from and just where you grew up and how you grew up and those kinds of things. Like, can you just tell just a brief history of who you are?
Yeah, well, I was born in Belfast and born and raised in it. Still live there. I was born in 1953. There was 11 children in the household, and I went to school nearby. It's a working class area, and I suppose when I did a couple of exams called the O levels at the time,
Sure.
around 16 or 17, I realised I wasn't that academic and was looking for a job and got a job as believe it or not, a local civil servant in what was then called the Belfast Corporation Electricity Department. And that was my first job, first time I got money. I took it actually on for summer and with the intention of going back to studying. And then once I started getting money in my pocket, that was it.
Yeah.
You know. So that was my start as a civil servant. Yeah, and that was around the time. I mean, that was 69 and the 70, 71. We'd already seen what was happening. There was pogroms. There was lots of Catholics were getting moved out of their areas. I lived in West Belfast, and there was areas close to me because I lived in Ballymurphy Whitelock area. There was places close to me where people were getting moved out and putting into sort of temporary housing and all of that. Their houses were burnt down. So it was a very bizarre situation. I can't say that I came from a very staunchly Republican family history or anything. But what radicalized me, because I mean, I had really not an awful lot of interest in politics, was what was happening around me. And to be mild about it, I didn't like it. It was horrific. It was people who had to shift down to the south of Ireland and stay in an army camp in Gormanstown while it was at its height at that stage. The British Army then brought in. And at first, people thought that they were going to be brought in to be peacekeepers. That changed very quickly, and were welcomed because of that, because the Catholic population were under all sorts of difficulties. It was in Derry and that, and of course, the television was starting to show all different areas, so you didn't just know what was going on in your own area, you saw it in other areas. And I started going out with other teenagers at the time, sort of attack the areas. There was barricades put up and all of that. And in a very short period of time, we realised that the British Army were there to protect the British system, which meant they were going to take a side. So they weren't there to be in between and to be neutral in it, although they've claimed that time and time again.
Sure.
You then found that you were getting stopped in your own street, you were getting searched, you were getting abused, all of that. And the riots had started. And the IRA didn't really, to be honest, didn't really exist. In fact, it was, I remember graffiti on the wall which said, IRA, I ran away.
Yeah.
It was because there had been campaigns before in the 60s, but it had died away. So what radicalized me really was not reading books or reading the history, if I'm being very honest. I mean, I went to La De La Salle school, which we did some basic Irish history. When I went to secondary school, really it was British history and some American history, but avoided all the stuff about Irish history. But what was happening in the street was enough for me, and I decided I wasn't putting up with it. I suppose the big issue was internment. They brought in internment in August 1971. Some of my relatives were arrested, but I think it was about 400. There was hundreds anyway. Overnight were put until these camps, which were like prisoner of war camps. It used to be a British Army camp, and a lot of them, most of them actually, were innocent. They were just lifting nationalists and Catholics up.
There's a term, internment and imprisonment, and it's not internment itself is not a term that is used very often in the States, and I'm not sure that a lot of people really understand what the actual difference between the two of them are.
I suppose it's very simple. In internment, you were interned without trial. In other words, you did not go through a judicial process. They simply said, we believe that you're an insurgent or you're involved in the IRA or whatever it might be, and they put you in the camps. These were nissen huts, big long huts where you would get maybe 80 people into the one hut, and you had 3 huts in a cage or a compound.
Sure.
And it looked like, if you look at a prisoner of war camp during the war, which you see on TV all the time, it's something very similar to that. And whereas, they started, of course, arresting people on other issues, could have been rioting, it could have been, public disorder and all of that. And they were getting sort of arrested and getting sentenced. So they were going into a different part, the same camp, so it had the same appearance. It wasn't like an ordinary jail. They were put in there, but they were put separately. So you had internment here, and you had them there. They then started trying to change the names of the jails because you have to remember, this was at the time when the British were condemning internment, I think, in Chile, and yet they were practicing it themselves. In
sure.
North of Ireland.
Yeah.
So it's that type of contradiction. Anyway, I joined na Fianna. I suppose, if I'm honest, because I didn't know, I was quite young, I didn't know if I could do what was demanded of me. But at that stage, in that very short period of stage, when I saw what was happening, I wanted to do something about it. And really, it was, I suppose, it's not too much to say. It was a revolutionary situation. It was changing every day, and there were people getting killed, and there were people getting burnt out, and they were nationalists and Catholics, and Irish. I mean, that was what it was all about. We had a system which was there, which was almost, well, it's been described as an apartheid state. So
Sure.
The Unionists, the pro-British Unionists, were in charge. To give an example of that, Derry, which was something like 90 to 95% Catholic and nationalist, was dominated. In other words, the bulk, 2/3 of the councillors were actually Unionist. So it was gerrymandering. That's the type, and that wasn't. Derry is the best example of it, but that
Sure.
was happening throughout. And they had a system which was there to discriminate against Catholics, and it was endemic. It was and you may not have been aware of it, sort of so straightforwardly, but you became very aware of it then, because then you started reading. Then people were, out in the streets telling you what had happened, telling what was going on in other areas. You were seeing it on TV, and your, I suppose, political knowledge increased in that. So at first it was anger, then it was, well, what can be done about this? And then it was, well, actually the only thing that can be done is to take up action, because people were getting shot in the streets, people were getting burnt out, and we had to do something about it. And the IRA itself. So I joined na Fianna, which was an organisation, was, if you like, described as sort of the young IRA, because I didn't know if I could do it. I ended up in jail, actually in Dublin, in Mountjoy Jail. I remember I got 2 years. I was 18 at the time, but I got a 2-year sentence, and it was for armed robbery, and we're fundraising for na Fianna. And realised in there, I thought, 2 years, I'm not going to be a teenager when I get out. so I wanted to escape. So after 5 months, I did escape. So I escaped from Mountjoy Jail. I went home. Obviously, I was on the run then, so I went back up to Belfast. I remember being in the house for about an hour. My parents were trying to take it easy and not go over the top. They had supported me, but they didn't know that I was involved in this stuff, right?
Sure.
And a sergeant in a military vehicle actually slammed the halt outside the door. And I went straight out the back door, run down the entry into the neighbour's house, and just didn't go back to the house. So I was in the house for about an hour, and I just went to run. And then I sought out, because while I was in jail, I said, what am I doing, Fianna? I need to be in the IRA, because they're the ones who are fighting the British. And I joined the IRA.
Okay. Now, you are imprisoned in Britain in the 70s, but I want to touch on a couple of events that are very prominent in the struggle's history, and that is the hunger strikes, and kind of both of them, and what led to both the 80 and the 81, And then also I want to talk about the escape that happens following it, because I think that those three things are, I mean, they're widely known or whatnot, but I think you have a very interesting perspective on them, and also I want to kind of lay the foundation to move us into what comes after.
Well, very, very quickly, I mean, what also happened at that period in 1971 was Bloody Sunday, which I think is
Correct.
worth
Yes.
mentioning because it had a huge impact. Now, I had already joined the funeral because of Internment, because of what I seen about me. But Bloody Sunday then really, that was something which became a recruiting sergeant for people. That was, a peaceful protest. 14 people were shot dead by the British Army. Most people would know about Bloody Sunday. Then we went on. I joined that at one stage. There was a plebiscite or a referendum, which was already which was set up for March 1973. I was asked. Volunteers were asked for to go to England to bring, if you like, the military struggle, to the heart of England, and that was because they were known as the Old Bailey bombs. So it was a series
Sure.
of bombs, not set to kill people, but set to make a very political protest about the British in their heartland being in Ireland. I then got 2 life sentences and 20 years. I went on hunger strike in 1973 with a number of other people. Probably people remember the Price sisters more than anybody. It was 2 women that were with us. And was on hunger strike and force fed for over 200 days. And then there was a deal done to send us back, because the hunger strike was to be returned to a jail in Ireland as opposed to anything else, just returned to a jail in Ireland where there was already political status. In other words, the prisoners would be treated as political prisoners. And I eventually got back, to cut a long story short, I eventually got back in 1975, and then I ended up in the cages with other comrades who were political prisoners. And then after trying to escape a couple of times in 1981, which is the time of the hunger strike, which went on. What happened in the hunger strike was in 1976, the British decided to try and criminalise the political prisoners. In other words, political prisoners were there, everybody knew them as political prisoners, even the imagery of it. So they built another jail adjacent to it, which was the H blocks, became known as the H blocks, which then looked like an ordinary jail, because in the huts there was 80 prisoners in it. In any compound, it would be 3 times that. In this jail, then you were able to put individual prisoners in individual cells, more easy to control, more easy to break. And there was an arbitrary date, the 1st of March 1976, where they said anybody arrested for anything after that period would be a criminal. It was as straightforward as that. It was criminalising, trying to criminalise, should I say. So the blocks then, one at a time, the first guy went in was a guy called Kieran Nugent. And he said, because you had to then wear, because we were wearing our own clothes, you had to put on a prison uniform. And he said, and he was the first one in, so he was on his own. He said, put on the prison uniform. He says, the only way I'll get that uniform on me is by nailing it to my back. And that started off the protest. Then as more people went through the court system, and the court system was, remember, it was like a conveyor belt. So it wasn't as simple as you went through a judicial process, which is that there was torture, there was beatings, there was people were being forced to make confessions, all of which is coming out now and came out after it. And therefore, it was called the conveyor belt. So you went through the interrogation centres, come out the other end, a lot of people made statements. Some people were caught doing things, which was a different thing, and they were filling up. So over a fairly short period of time, more and more people came in and more people joined the protest. And the protest went on for a long time. They then stopped letting people what's called slop out in the jail, which means you're able to go out to the ablutions, you're able to put your waste into toilets and things. So there was no sanitary facilities in the actual cells they were in, and they stopped doing that. And so the prisoners then started doing the no wash protest, and they were also so they started pouring the stuff out because they wouldn't let them bring their body waste out, they started pouring it out and onto the doors and things like that there. And it escalated like that, and that became the no wash protest. So they took everything out of the cells. They were left. I wasn't there, by the way. I was still up in the cages.
Yeah.
And this was like 200 yards away across a wall. Our comrades went through processes where there were basically daily beatings. If you were going to the toilet, you were beaten. If you were going to the mass, you were beaten. If you were going to, whatever it might be. So visits were stopped. They weren't getting visits. They weren't getting anything. They refused to wear the prison uniforms. So it was called the blanket protest, and then because you only had a blanket, and then the no wash protest. That went on and actually came to a position, I suppose, over a long period of time where the prisoners sat down. Bobby Sands was the officer commandant, what was called the officer commandant within the jail of the prisoners, and there was a staff sat out in military formation and all of that, and they took care of each other and said, okay, we need to do something about this. This can't go on forever. So they ended up, because of the beatings, because of all of that, and then there was forced washing. So they would bring you up, and a deck scrubber that you would have.
Yeah.
They would throw the prisoner into an ice cold bath or a hot bath, and scrape them with this. This is the way they washed them, and they used hose pipes on them and all of that. So it just got worse and worse. So the hunger strike came from the prisoners. The leadership at the time, for I think very good reasons, for the worry that people had. I mean, in the hunger strike that I was on, for instance, in 1973 and 74, Michael Gaughan, who was in the hunger strike with us, died of force feeding. He was basically killed through force feeding.
Yeah.
So they knew the dangers in all of this. Force feeding had stopped. I mean, we got force feeding stopped legally. And force feeding had never been used in Ireland since Tom Ash had died in 1917.
Okay, yeah.
I might get that wrong, but I was around that period. So there was no issue about that. So they went on hunger strike. And the first hunger strike went on, 7 people went on at the one time. And the part of the difficulty in that is that there was no build-up. So even with that, there had to be a build-up. People started coming out in the streets, but all of these things take time, all of that. And that hunger strike was brought to an end because there were promises given that people would get their
by
own
the
clothes,
British.
by the British. This would happen as soon as they came off the hunger strike, and most people were very close to death at that stage. When they came off the hunger strike, they reneged on the deal. And so inevitably, well, maybe not inevitably, but Bobby Sands, who had taken over as OC then, discussed it out, and people were adamant that we need to see this through. So the hunger strike began again. This time, Bobby Sands decided that he would go on 2 weeks before the rest of them, and because I think he knew or he believed that he would have to die first, and then the others would go on. As it turned out, 10 prisoners died from the IRA and the INLA. And that became a watershed moment, I think, in the history of the struggle, and also in the history of the overall Irish situation. And because it was it was very difficult. I mean, it was very plain for people to see who wouldn't know the detail of all of that. What would drive someone to be able to? Because they didn't want to die. They went on hunger strike as using, their bodies as saying, look, this is what we're prepared to do because this is so unjust, And they didn't want to die. But most people, I think, understood, and more people, and there was great protests outside with families and all of that, but more and more people understood. The question they were asking was a very simple one. Well, how could a person give up their lives in that, which is a horrific way of doing it because it was through a whole period. So some died in after 60. Bobby Sands himself was 66 days. There was others around 60 days, some 70 days. But to be able to do that took. They couldn't get past the fact that it took not only stamina, but it took great determination and belief that what they were doing was right. And I think that's what broke the British propaganda, because they put all sorts of things out about, these are a crime is a crime is a crime, these are all,
Sure.
criminals, and et cetera, et cetera. And therefore that, and then in the middle of it, people outside in the leadership, and I meant to say earlier on, the leadership didn't really want it, because actually what you're doing is handing over a struggle to people on hunger strike, which would go, and this was after it was a hunger strike which had hadn't achieved what it was, but they supported the prisoners, so they supported them with everything they could. Once
Sure.
the prisoners made up their mind, but it was the prisoners who made the decision as opposed to the leadership. But then the leadership thought, and someone brought forward, why not run Bobby in an election, and of course he was elected as an MP. There was TDs elected in the south as well, Kieran Doherty. And that brought, if you like, electoralism into, as part of the strategic approach, if I could put it that way, of the Republican movement. In other words, that there was an ability, because it was always skewed. We were abstentionists, we didn't do it. But then we're saying, look, we need to think, what is the best way? This is about getting our freedom. So what do we need to do, as opposed to there's a principle and there's a tactic.
So I was actually going to ask you, from your perspective, I talked to Jim last year or the year before, had a great conversation with him about running Bobby and what that entailed and what it looked like and all those things. But from where you sit now, and also where you were then, did you have any thoughts about running guys for office and having them move into the political realm? Did you agree with it, or did you were you just indifferent to it?
Personally, I agreed with it. I mean,
did you really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you had have done it outside of the context of the hunger strike, it would have caused more differences of opinion, if I could put it that way. It would have been very strong views of it. And you have to remember that there was a truce in 1972, which failed as well.
Sure.
The British promised all sorts of things. It lasted, I think, about 10 days and then broke. It was tried again in 74, 75, which was a complete disaster. So there was certainly a view that you cannot trust the British. You have to keep fighting, even if you're talking. Not against talking, but talk and fight.
Sure.
When the hunger, and there was no idea of going for electoralism. The hunger strike changed the debate, and it allowed for the possibilities of having those thoughts, of debating those out. So I mean, I'm speaking personally, and I mean, I was in jail at the time. We were still in the cages, and there was, to my memory, a pretty acceptance. It was like there was arguments, or not arguments, it was debates, but basically it was an acceptance.
Sure.
Part of it was about saving Bobby's life. You have to remember as well.
Yes.
So there was a comrade who was in hunger strike. He, this, and there was a belief, maybe, well, it was a naive belief when you think about it, from many who thought they wouldn't let him die. But this was Thatcher. This was the Thatcher government. And I think Bobby Sands knew better than anybody that there was a strong possibility they would let him die. And then we went through that period. The hunger strike came to an end after 10 people died. And in jail terms, and of course in the struggle outside, then that opened up the whole thing about being involved in electoralism and being able to get a strength, and it's another aspect of the struggle and things like that. In the jail, what the prisoners did was they sat down. At this stage, I was in the blocks. I tried to escape, and I ended up down in the blocks anyway. So I was in with all of those people who had been on hunger strike, who went through the protest and all of that. And it was a different protest at that, because they weren't on the No Wars protest and anything like that. And there was an escape committee put together and come up with the idea of an audacious idea of a mass escape. And I was brought into it. I tried to escape a number of times. At that stage, I thought it was the worst escaper in the world because I tried that many times. But I was brought into the discussion and all of that, and it was very complicated. But from the start, I thought, this is a winner. This can work. I was taking over a block, one of the 8 blocks, was 8 H blocks, I was H7. And the idea was, in a way, if you think about it politically, was think big, and then, you know, the whole thing at the time was smash the H blocks. So people were very demoralised after the hunger strike, inside and outside of jail. Lost 10 comrades. But in jail, what they did was they sat down and said, okay, look, we've lost, and it wasn't just comrades, it was friends, it was, you know, this is a family almost, you know all these people. And said, look, we are where we are. We've lost good friends and comrades. So what do we need to do? And it couldn't be a huge discussion, right? Because if you're going for an escape, it has to be the least people know about it. For its success. So it was a small group of I suppose, leadership figures within the jail who put it together. And then it had to be put outside. So this was basically an IRA operation, so it had to be given to the IRA outside. And I think, I don't know, but I presume the quandary for the IRA outside was that, you know, a bit like the hunger strike, if this escape worked, it would be a great blow against the British. If it failed, and there was guns going to be used in it, then it could be a complete disaster and drive things back. It's like I suppose like all military operations, you know, military operation is there to, you know, enhance or to get where you're going. But it's a military operation. So if you mess it up, or if you do the wrong thing, or, you know, if you make a mistake, then it can drive it back as well. But they agreed once they looked at it and asked about different aspects of it and all of that. And the escape took place. The psychology of the escape, just to say this, and then I'll move on. The psychology of the escape, although there was weapons used, and we had to take over, you know, a whole block within like 2 minutes, was use verbal aggression, so that you didn't have to use physical aggression.
Sure.
Because there was going to be 38 on the escape. There was something like, in that block alone, there was 130 people, somewhere near 130 people in it. So there's a lot of people who were going to be staying. And the reason, because we could have took more out, the reason it was 38 was anybody who had 4 years or less left on their sentence wasn't going on it, because it wasn't worth the risk for them, because it could have turned bad. If they had found out we had weapons, you know, it could have turned into an ambush, etc., etc. Anyway, it was a successful escape. Went a bit wrong down at the front gate because of timing, but 38 got out and 19 stayed out. The found others within, because we had to abandon the original plan, which is the lorry got straight out. We abandoned it at the front gate, and we had to go through a brick camp as well, and then took the fields. Anyway, long story short, that was successful. In political terms, in personal terms, it was great, because I was on it.
I was going to say,
and it was like it was an incredible. I'd been in jail 10 years at the time, so I was actually probably the longest served prisoner who was on this. And it was just, you know, you're out, you were free, you were running in the fields. It was, I was still nervous and all of that there, but once you got away and I got down to South Armagh, it was just, it's hard to describe. It was just unbelievable.
And then you go on the run. You were on the run for what, 2.5 years, 3 years?
Yeah, about 2.5 years. Yeah. I was arrested again in Holland. I was an active service down around South Armagh on the border for a while, and then I was asked by the leadership to go to Europe.
I will say, I wish we had more time to spend speaking about these things, because the story is absolutely fascinating. I will just simply tell anybody watching this, the books that you want to get are Playing My Part by Gerry Kelly, and then also The Escape, which is just absolute. I mean, just to encompass the stories, they do a fantastic job. But for time's sake, I actually want to go a little forward and talk about when you come into public service again. And I have to say, I've always found it very interesting that what brought you into active service was a community desire, and then what you have done in public service is still a community desire. Like, it's completely different tactics, but it's kind of what in there. Like, what, you know, when, first of all, how were you how were you released? Because you were actually sentenced at one point in time to 2 life sentences in 20 years. So the fact that you are a out and a free man is a story that needs to be told. But then on top of that, like, what brings you into community service work again? And
Well, I mean, you're right. I started off 2020, and actually ended up 2025 years because of 2 attempted escapes. But when I was in jail in Holland, they would only they wouldn't extradite me on the basis of the original charges, because they weren't covered under the extradition treaty between the Dutch and the British. So they were quashed. I mean, well, one of the determinations was that the British had to quash them if they were to get me back. And what I was then, there was something like, on each escapee was charged with 75 charges. I mean, the British did what they always do; they just went completely over the top.
sure,
So every single person who was in escape, and many of the people on the escape didn't know about it until it was happening, until just before it was happening. But they charged them all. What the Dutch did was they went through the charges and found, and I was there also with Rick McFarlane, and found that in my case, they reduced the 75 charges down to 7, and in Rick McFarlane's case from 75 down to 5 charges. So I went back. I went in remand then because they'd quashed my original sentences, and then at the trial, I got 5 years. So as small as that is, my father wasn't going to go down to court because he was expecting to get life again, and I think he was painting the house. And he's the only father I know who, when I got 5 years, went out and celebrated for 3 days because it was going from a life sentence down to 5 years, and then I'd already been in 13 months, and I was only doing half of that, so I was out within about 13 months. And when I got out, I joined Sinn Féin. And because, I mean, when I said earlier on, although what brought me into all this was what happened around me, it doesn't sustain you. I mean, anger won't sustain you. You know, lack of knowledge won't sustain you. So I had widely read, and I knew politically where I was and what I wanted and all of that. And I've always been of the community. I'm from a working class community. I'm very proud of that. And that was my politics, and that's what the politics developed. And that's what Sinn Féin is as well. And so I joined Sinn Féin. At first I was working in the prisoners department, and then I went into the press department for a while. And then in 1994, when the ceasefire occurred, the cessation of military activities, then the talks were started. But before that, I've been with Martin McGuinness in 1993, with private talks with a representative of the British government up in Derry, which is now, you know, public history. And then I was asked by the Ard Comhairle to be part of the first negotiating team. This is the public negotiations, which started in '94. So I was sort of catapulted very quickly into that position, along with Martin McGuinness as the chief negotiator. And of course, we're going tomorrow I'm speaking at the inaugural meeting of the Martin McGuinness Foundation, which has been set up in America. It's already set up in Ireland. And there was a team of us went to the British, and that's where the negotiations started. All of it based. I mean, I suppose we were there. Maybe it's me. Maybe it was only me. But you have this notion of the British that they, you know, have 2,000 years of negotiating ability and all of that there. And what we found out, certainly what I found out very quickly, but I think it was collective, what we found out very quickly is actually that's not what they're like. Their policy was inertia. Their policy was, this is a security issue, and, you know, just contain it. And when and of course they were not a minority government at the time because it was under John Major. They depended on the Unionists. But then there was a landslide victory by Labour Party and Tony Blair. And Tony Blair seen, or at least had the confidence to think that he might be able to be part of resolving the politics of it. And that was a huge change. Now, we had already, of course, come to that situation because we knew that, you know, it was basically a military stalemate. We knew that, you know, it would have to end politically. We knew negotiations would have to be part of that. We had learned all of that, or at least the leadership had learned all of that. And there was a huge negotiation with the base because these were big changes as we went forward. Even having the cessation of military activity, and then that broke down, if you remember. And then there was another cessation in '97, and that was sort of moving into a whole situation where we're dealing with the Brits. I thought at the time, when we got to '98 and the Good Friday Agreement, that that was negotiation done. But I found out that actually you spend the rest of your life negotiating, and we're still in it. I mean, if you look at it now.
Yeah.
So we went through the Good Friday Agreement was a huge step forward. There were other agreements after that, the St Andrews agreements. And then even in legacy, in terms of the issues around the Stormont House Agreement, trying to deal with victims and survivors on all sides, right across the board. The Stormont House Agreement was also a great step forward, or it looked like a great step forward, because we had both governments, the British and Irish governments, and of course America was involved in all of that. America has a big stake in the Good Friday Agreement. The interventions from America at the highest level, especially with the Irish and British governments. Even, you know, the first action of giving Gerry Adams a visa so that he could go over
Sure.
To America. All of those things fell into place. I mean, to move on to sort of where we are today, the Stormont House Agreement was working. We have gained in strength because of our politics. To go back to community politics which make sense to people, we are making huge strides in the south. We're the biggest party in Ireland. And you can see how well we're doing south and also in the north. We're very strong in the north as well. And what has happened recently was that then Michelle O'Neill would have been the First Minister. So first time in our history,
Yeah.
you know, with a leader, you know, and we could be in government in the south. So we have Mary Lou MacDonald as we could have Mary Lou MacDonald as the Taoiseach, and Michelle O'Neill as the First Minister, and that frightened the life out of the establishment. In the north, the Unionists under Geoffrey Donaldson refused to appoint a Deputy First Minister. They are saying it's to do with the protocol. There's many people who think it is more based than that. A lot of the people don't even understand the protocol. It's more based than that. They can't stand the situation where there would be a First Minister who is actually not only a nationalist but also a Republican.
So let me ask you this: what, given the current status of in the north, of the government in the north, like what does the next 60, 90, 120 days kind of play out?
Well, there's some obvious things coming up on the 28th of October. It used to be that if you weren't able to set up an executive within 7 days, then there would be another election. That legislation was changed, so it's now stretched, without going through the details, stretched till 6 months. On the 20th of October, that date is up. So it's up to the British Secretary of State under the legislation as it sits to call an election. So we could be into another assembly election then. And so far the DUP haven't moved off their position, arguing that the protocol has to shift. We have a new British Prime Minister in. Truss, I understand, she's coming over tomorrow to speak to the President Biden. And she's saying, I think, foolish things, that, you know, they're now setting aside the fact that there might be a trade deal. She is nearly trying to set aside the protocol, trying to separate out, you know, those issues, Brexit and the protocol, from other international issues. I don't think that's real politics. I don't think that's going to happen. That's what they're talking about now. But we'll see what happens from that. There are elections coming up in the south there is a changeover of a Taoiseach in November, December maybe, I think it's November. And they're under pressure as well, because their whole concentration, I mean, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael used to be the opposite parties. Now they're joining together to try and keep Sinn Féin out, even though Sinn Féin's the biggest party. And so there are all sorts of scenarios which could take place. What we are very sure about is we're very sure about our politics, we're very sure about where we believe we're going. There's a discussion now which has never been so engaged in, both nationally and internationally, and that is what does a United Ireland look like? And of course our belief is United Ireland has to encompass everybody. It's a United Ireland of diversity, but a United Ireland also based on equality. And what we want is a fairness, if you use more simpler words, an economy which is fair to people, where people aren't in poverty, where people have a place to live, where they have a decent wage. It's all of that basic stuff which you would think was just the human rights, and actually, in fact, is human rights. But that's not the oversimplified. That's where we're going. We believe that's what is best for the people in Ireland, and we have convinced many of that, and our job is to convince many more, and to have a referendum at an agreed stage, which is in the near future, and move on from there. There's all sorts of things which will happen in Britain, globally, and all of that, which will affect people. We're in a huge cost of living crisis, North and South in Ireland. Well, I think it's probably becoming global.
Yeah, I think
and
you're probably right.
We have to deal with all of that. But in the end, what we want is what we started off. You have to remember the Good Friday. It's important to say this, because sometimes unionists, misinterpret this. The Good Friday Agreement was an ability to find a political way forward. It wasn't the resolution of the issue of Ireland or the relationship between Ireland and Britain. What it did was it allowed, for the first time in our history, an ability to achieve those things politically. And what unionism is doing is trying to draw that away, is to break that down. And the test of the British is, what will they do? These people have there was other people who were in power in England who had a stake in this. The question is, and once you watch Boris Johnson, and I don't know about Truss, the new Prime Minister, but all of that we just have to watch, and we have to deal with it on the basis of what we believe and our policies, and convince people of those policies.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. First of all, for taking the time to sit down with us, but also, 45 years of service and believing in your community and advocating for your community. I think that's absolutely one of the most admirable qualities a person can have. And so I really want to take a time just to say thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully we'll be able to have you back and have an actual discussion just simply about one of the many things in your life that has been there. But I really do want to say thank you so much for joining us, and that we will look forward to seeing what comes in the next coming time.
Thank you for the invite, and I have to say that thank you for the compliment, but it's a whole generation, my generation, and then another generation under me, who have been doing this, and it's one of the things maybe the British don't understand. We have great stamina.